I want to express my sincerest gratitude to the culture team for welcoming the Eco Museum into the fold. This project has been a collaborative effort by many people who are passionate about preserving our indigenous heritage. I am especially grateful to Andy Chuck and Maya Masawal for his inspiring quotes and Beth Morgan for her valuable academic insight. I also thank the United Nations for providing this statistical information on this presentation. The Eco Museum began when a group of people share a vision of preserving our cultural heritage. Together, we acquired a piece of land and created exhibits showcasing the arts, culture, traditions, and practices of the Maya, Mestizo, and Bayman people. Our goal is to protect both the land and our ancestors' legacy. The Eco Museums offer visitors a unique and educational experience where they can learn about the Maya people's way of life, their food, celebrations, worships, and interaction with each other and the land. We hope that by visiting the museum, future generations will learn from our shared past and discover the wisdom of our ancestors.
Culture stands for keeping up with language, culture, heritage, and the arts. So, why is the culture of our Indigenous ancestors important in the here and now? Why should we fight to prevent the language, culture, heritage, archaeology, anthropology, and arts of ancient tribes from slipping into extinction? And how does any of this relate to the orange economy?
During this journey, it became glaringly apparent that we had tapped into much more than we had initially anticipated. By conserving our past, we saw that we were also helping to unify communities, encourage deeper understanding and tolerance of each other, and learning lessons from our elders about innovative solutions for a more sustainable way of life. This brings us to the heart of tonight's discussion, the importance of keeping Indigenous history alive and how it impacts on the orange economy. The creative economy, also known as the orange economy, is an evolving concept based on the contribution and potential of creative assets to drive economic growth and development. It embraces economic, cultural, and social aspects, integrating with technology, intellectual property, and tourism objectives. With this in mind, this year's overall theme aims to look at the creative economies of the past, present, and future to ensure a sustainable future.
There are about 476 million indigenous people living in 90 countries around the world. Even though they make up a small part of the world's population, they speak a huge number of the world's 7,000 languages. This shows how diverse and rich their cultures are. We are now in a special time known as the International Decade of Indigenous Languages, when the United Nations is focusing on protecting indigenous languages. Languages are important because they show us how different people see the world. They help us understand our culture, memories, and values. They are a big part of who we are. Sadly, many languages are going extinct. Indigenous people speak most of these endangered languages. This is because of things like colonization, globalization, taking away their land and not teaching the language to younger people. Indigenous language aren't just a way to communicate. They are central to who indigenous people are and how they see the world. They also hold important knowledge about nature and the environment. So when an indigenous language is lost, we lose a part of their culture forever.
The regression of Indigenous languages also diminishes the possibility of Indigenous knowledge contributing to sustainable development. In this context, it is particularly important to promote the inclusion of Indigenous knowledge in global climate science and related policy processes. The UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples establishes a universal framework of minimum standards for the survival, dignity, and well-being of Indigenous peoples worldwide. It recognises the right to languages as an inherent right of Indigenous peoples. The status quo is indeed grave. There are only 4,000 surviving Indigenous languages spoken by a mere 6% of the total world population. Yet, Indigenous traditions have served as a dependable means of acquiring knowledge transmitted across generations. This knowledge includes herbal medicine, food processing, and community practices that move civilizations from one stage to another. Further to this, I want to highlight the critical and heartbreaking issues that have continued to affect Indigenous peoples around the world for centuries. The systematic erasure of languages and cultures through ethnic cleansing and cultural genocide. Throughout history, we have witnessed the devastating effects of these practices, with Indigenous communities often bearing the brunt of these atrocities. This is powerfully illustrated in the following personal testimonials of the Yucatec Maya people in Belize, whose language and culture have been systematically suppressed. The loss of the Yucatec Maya language is a poignant example of cultural genocide. Discrimination and an oppressive educational system have played significant roles in this tragic decline. In Belize, schools have historically neglected to teach children how to speak, read, or write in Maya, effectively severing the transmission of cultural heritage from one generation to the next. Consider the words of a Maya elder. It is certainly true that the mayors of the northern Belize were forced to adapt to circumstances imposed upon them by the dominant Anglo-Saxon elite. This quote encapsulates the pressures faced by the Maya people, who were compelled to abandon their language and customs to conform to the expectations of a ruling class that viewed their culture as inferior.
Maya tongue, also known as Yucatec Maya, and is commonly known by its speakers as simply Maya, is one of the languages spoken in Belize, one of the indigenous languages that was once the lingua franca in northern Belize, but due to many factors, it have lost its speakers. Factors like discrimination and the educational system that continues to be rooted in colonialism. These are some of the testimonies of all Mayeros on why they were not able to continue the language.
In her published academic paper in the Oxford University Press, Danielle Conversi further draws our attention to the practice of cultural homogenization. Cultural homogenization, ethnic cleansing, and genocide can be seen as a part of a continuum. Throughout the modern era, states have forced their citizens to conform to common standards and cultural patterns. The goal has often been to seek congruence between ethnic and political boundaries, that is, to forge cohesive, unified communities of citizens under governmental control. Cultural homogenization is defined here as a state-led policy aimed at cultural standardization and the overlap between state and culture. As the goal is frequently to impose the culture of dominant elites on the rest of the citizenry, it consists basically of a top-down process where the state seeks to nationalise the masses. In her published book and Oxford University Press article, Elsa Novick discusses the concept of cultural genocide from an international law perspective. Cultural genocide is the systematic destruction of traditions, values, language, and other elements that make one group of people distinct from another. Cultural genocide remains a recurrent topic, appearing not only in the form of wide-ranging claims about the commission of discussions before the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, and also have the drafting of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. These discussions have, however, displayed the lack of a uniform understanding of the concept of cultural genocide, and thus of the role that international law is expected to fulfill in this regard. The concept of cultural genocide, an international law perspective, details how international law has approached the core idea underlying the concept of cultural genocide, and how this framework can be strengthened and fostered. It traces developments from the early conceptualization of cultural genocide to the contemporary question of its reparation. Through this journey, the book discusses the evolution of various branches of international law in relation to both cultural protection and the cultural destruction in light of a number of legal cases in which either the concept of cultural genocide or the idea of cultural destruction has been discussed. Such cases include the destruction of cultural and religious heritage in Bosnia and Herzegovina, the forced removals of Aboriginal children in Australia and Canada, and the case law of the Inter-American Court of Human Rights in relation to Indigenous and tribal groups' cultural destruction. We must recognise and address the ongoing impact of ethnic cleansing and cultural genocide on Indigenous peoples. The preservation and revitalisation of Indigenous languages and cultures are not just acts of cultural preservation, but vital steps towards justice and reconciliation. Let us commit ourselves to supporting Indigenous communities in reclaiming their heritage, honouring their histories, and ensuring that their languages and cultures thrive for generations to come. Anthropology seeks to define what holds a society together, what makes it function the way it does, how the society has adapted to the environment, the main modes of communication within the society, and how the people's past has shaped their culture. Anthropologists like Mead, Boas, and Malawinski devoted their work to combating racism, promoting cultural tolerance, and instilling the idea of cultural revitalisation into the discipline of anthropology. Anthropologists play a vital role in understanding culture and society, exploring topics such as language, religion, family, social organisation, economics, and art. Their contributions help us recognise cultural differences, challenge assumptions, and address social justice issues. Keeping Indigenous culture, language, and tradition alive today is crucial for several reasons. For example, 1. The preservation of cultural heritage. Indigenous cultures contribute to the rich tapestry of human diversity, offering unique perspectives on life, community, and the environment. Indigenous knowledge systems provide sustainable ways of living that can address contemporary issues like environmental conservation and climate change. 2. Rights and justice. Preserving Indigenous cultures respects the rights and dignity of Indigenous peoples, aligning with international agreements like the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. It also promotes reparative justice for historical injustices faced by Indigenous communities. 3. Social and psychological benefits. Maintaining cultural practices strengthens community bonds and improves the well-being of Indigenous people. Preserving Indigenous languages helps maintain cultural continuity and gives individuals a sense of belonging and pride in their heritage. 4. Contributions to modern society. Indigenous practices often provide innovative solutions to contemporary problems, and Indigenous worldviews can influence modern practices in fields like medicine, education, and governance. 5. Study of historical Indigenous communities. Studying historical Indigenous communities provides a complete understanding of human history and offers valuable lessons in resilience, social organisation, and conflict resolution. The study of Indigenous culture is essential for education and the orange economy, which encompasses the creative industries. It promotes cultural awareness and sensitivity, enriches the curriculum, encourages critical thinking, and fosters a sense of place and environmental stewardship among students. For the orange economy, Indigenous cultures contribute unique artistic styles, narratives, and traditional knowledge which can inspire innovation in creative industries. Supporting Indigenous artists and creators opens up economic opportunities for these communities, promoting economic inclusion and development. Beyond this, actively encouraging tourists to interact within the museum space supports local economic growth and sustainability, and helps to disseminate awareness and understanding on a global scale. It is crucial for school children to understand Indigenous people from the country where they live. This fosters respect, cultural diversity, accurate historical understanding, social and civic responsibility, and environmental stewardship. It also promotes personal and community identity, educational enrichment, and recognition of Indigenous contributions to modern society. Learning lessons from our Indigenous ancestors about how to live in a better way today is crucial for sustainable living, community and social cohesion, health and well-being, cultural values and ethics, governance and leadership, cultural and artistic inspiration, ethical and philosophical insights, and addressing contemporary challenges. Indigenous knowledge systems offer practical solutions for adapting to and mitigating the impacts of climate change, and their practices can inform climate resilience strategies for communities worldwide.
Older Maya mestizos recount their school days with a sense of fear and humiliation. One testimony reveals teachers made fun of Maya folklore, ridiculed stories about magical duendes and frogs coming from the sky, and malign Maya mestizo villagers for speaking what they call inferior languages, that is, Spanish and Maya. They believed that English was the only worthwhile language and enforced an English-only policy in the schools. As punishment for students who lapse into Maya or Spanish, the teachers brought out the lash. This form of linguistic repression was not just a denial of language, but a direct attack on the cultural identity and dignity of Mayan children. Don Berto, a Yucatec Maya of Cayo, Belize, shares a similar story. Only my father, mother, grandfather, and grandmother, they used to speak in Maya. But when we children went to school, it was strictly prohibited to speak Maya. We were permitted only to speak English, and we were punished if we spoke Maya. The provision of their native languages in school not only hinders their education, but also creates a sense of shame and alienation from their cultural roots. Rick Castillo, a Yucatec Maya from Orange Rock, expresses the enduring pain of his cultural genocide. I still cry in my heart when I remember when I asked my granny and grandpa to teach me Maya, and they answer, "No, hijo, las monjas y los de la escuela se van a molestar," meaning the people that administer the school don't want you to speak Maya. It burns till today. That was some 58 years ago. The refusal of elders to pass on the language out of fear of punishment and discrimination highlights the deep scars left by these policies.
The world has beautiful cultures, which are part of our rich diversity. The Maya is one of the living cultures in Belize. Today, there are three Maya groups: the Yucatec Maya, Quechua Maya, and Mopan Maya. There are also those who identify as mestizos, who are from Maya ancestry. The Maya culture is important because it reconnects us to our ancestors and to the land. Knowing the Maya culture is a way of educating people about their rich history of struggle and resistance, which can help them understand more about themselves and respect others. The Maya culture includes the use of medicinal plants, spirituality, creating a balance between humanity and nature. Maya is part of the Belizean identity. Losing the Maya culture would be a huge loss for humanity in many perspectives. In conclusion, keeping indigenous history alive is not only about preserving the past, but also about enriching the present and securing the future. By integrating indigenous knowledge, practices, and perspectives into our lives and economy, we can build a more peaceful and tolerant, resilient, equitable, and sustainable society. Thank you. Yum Botik.